So when I came into the room, it was set up for a projector and the chairs were in rows. But Mike said I've got maximum 10 coming onto this, and so I'm not going to stand there and project slides because just have a flick through. If I'm right, I mean, to be honest, you're going to need to be able to take them with you anyway. But also, I mean, I could put my laptop on there and project, show it from there. Mine's a Mac. This thing has several orifices, none of which will take or fit my Mac, so I can't connect up anyway. But if you can see the slides, the rest of it you don't need, and also it means we can then sit in a circle, which is something like this I prefer to do if that's right, because I do have lots of notes, lots of stuff I've scribbled down over time about this, and I've done lots of things about it in Church House over time as well. But whenever you do something about children coming into churches, in a room like this, you are inevitably doing it. If we were to do a tally, there'll be some people in this room who've done many more visits than I have, and certainly done more visits from the church point of view. Most of my visit experience anywhere has been as a teacher, to be honest. So it's better if we're in a circle. Just it means that we can chip in. So do chip in. It's quite a tight sort of, this is your last one, isn't it? So we'll go under the full hour, all right, if that's all right with you, and then people can stick around and ask questions afterwards. So if somebody asks a question that is hugely complicated, like, what do you do if a child is cycling on the roof of the church hall? Afterwards, when the recording stops, because I don't give the answer to that. Yes, so with that in mind, is that all right to make a start? So I'll just, so you've got the slides as well, so just by way of introduction, my name's Huw Thomas. I'm the Diocesan Director of Education, which is an absurdly long job title, but it means something very simple, which is that I just look after the church schools and then the church's role in wider education for the diocese of Sheffield, which basically is Sheffield, for those who don't know, Sheffield, Rotherham, Doncaster, a little bit of Barnsley, and a lovely little bit of the Goole area as well. So that's my role. And probably where this stuff's concerned, the main reason I got interested in doing this with churches was because I came to this role just as the diocese celebrated 100 years, the diocesan centenary that some people might remember. It's where the centenary project originated. And Bishop Peter, who was then the Bishop of Doncaster, said, what are you going to do? Schools. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to get to have a big drive on getting our churches open to schools, particularly as I've just come from 25 years in primary education, where a lot of my time had been spent taking children on school trips and experiencing both the ups and downs of it. I've had the worst experiences. I've had people it's one thing that I have certain pet hates as a teacher. Seeing my kids bored, seeing them naughty I could cope with, seeing them bored by somebody else, that used to really wind me up. I used to behave worse than them at times like that. So yes, good experience of trips. Most of my teaching was actually within walking distance of here as well. So Pittsmore in that direction, Broom Hall in that direction, and then on the Wyvern, last teacher post up there. So when I was head of Broom Hall, this lovely school called Springfield. Hiya, we haven't really started, I'm just waffling. So I'll just give you one of those. When I was head of Broom Hall, we actually used to take the whole of Key Stage 2 on trips. So we just line 100 of them up, and just, or 120 of them, and we just take them. And we were very adept as a bunch of teachers at stopping the traffic in the centre of town, which moves surprisingly slow when you think it does. That was always our argument. But we did lovely trips, like we did to the Odeon here. We're going to come to the Odeon here. I will start in a moment. But this is an example, I think, of what we're trying to capture when we're running a good school visit. We came to the Odeon here to see how a cinema works. We were treated to a talk by the cinema manager, then the cinema manager. Back then, he was still wearing the bow tie, the traditional bow tie. And he really knew how to play to the crowd, because he did this wonderful thing of telling this class, there is a film coming out soon called The Lion King, and it's probably going to be very popular, but we've got the trailer reel. Nobody's ever seen these scenes that you're about to see. And he did all this lovely, almost like Shakespeare. Nobody has ever seen these scenes. You are the first, because we're doing it in the morning, because it won't be shown till tonight, you are the first people in the country, probably, to see what you're about to see. And he said, and that, my friends, is the magic of cinema. Clicked his fingers, lights went boom, screen went up, you know. One little girl on the way home said to me, that's the best thing ever that was, you know. And we used to do this thing, we used to do this in a lot, we used to do this thing at the end of the show, we would stand up and all that, because many of them didn't go to the cinema thing, and we'd all turn to the projectionist and just do that. And I do wonder whether some of them are still doing it as adults. It probably makes for an interesting cinema date if they are, but there you go. So we're trying to capture something of that magic in a church building to create a memorable experience, and that's why you'll see on that first slide there, I'm hoping we'll be able to pop the slides onto the video, which I know the folks at work can do. I'm hoping we'll be able to pop those on, because you'll see there, some I'm going to skip over quite quickly. 3 reasons why I think it's really worth us offering. And what our churches, and when I put those there, I want kids in my church just because it's a parish church. I want kids in the parish stepping over. I just want them to do that. But if I've got to sell the idea to other people, if I've got to sell it to the now equivalent of me, the teacher over in Pittsmore, who you've really got to convince me my kids are going to have a good experience, then I've said it is really good educationally. The one I often quote to folks is if you just go into a church building, often you've got the most wonderful DT lesson, the most wonderful lesson in technology. One of the few buildings where you can actually go around it and look at it and see how it holds itself up. You can see the structures that hold it together. You can see the stones that make it up. You know, modern buildings don't have that same ability to see their structure. There's also just the experience as well. This is a good time to be going into schools and saying you can come and visit our church if you want to, because we are blessed by Ofsted. Honestly, I'm being recorded saying this. I'm blessed by Ofsted. I didn't thought I'd use those words. But Ofsted are pushing our schools now to good, solid religious experience, and also, I think, spirituality, and much more on the educational agenda. I was sacked. Part of my job as DD is Director of Education. If a church school is getting inspected, I talk to the inspector, the Ofsted inspector, because it's slightly unscripted, because not every school has got a DD, because it's not a church school. It can go in various directions. I had one just week before last, up at Tottenham All Saints. I think that was the longest conversation I'd had with an officer inspector about the spirituality of the school. And he kept on having to say, actually, that's not my area, I'm not supposed to go there, that's for church school inspection. But they really are interested, and schools are picking that up. And so schools are now asking and looking. I'm getting more requests phoned in. How do we get in touch with the local church? How do we get into the church? So it's worth pushing on that door, because people want their experience. And then finally, I would say the whole business of encounter as well, that if we're good at it, we'll be able to make the encounter something that's genuine for the children and young people. And that's why I put that pink triangle on there, because that's a symbol I use quite a lot when I'm talking to schools about it. We use it quite a lot in our RE teaching. If you imagine the triangle like that, and there you've got really distinctly religious stuff. Tomorrow morning I will celebrate communion, I will say the Eucharistic prayer, I will distribute, and I will be one of a few people, and the people who are there receiving it will be amongst a small number of people in my parish who will do that. That for them, and they believe that when they do that, they are remembering somebody who died for them. That we don't share that with our neighbours. Go down the triangle a little bit, and you get more of the neighbours involved. A lot of our neighbours, I was at a massive iftar last night and the night before, chatting to people where we were talking about the beliefs we share. We all believe that somebody God has reached out to us. And we go down as far as this. Everybody there understands something of shared meals, shared experience. Everybody there understands something of remember me in this way. They probably a lot of them have got things at home that help them remember something. So that triangle is where I think we do our best work. If we can go up and down the triangle by making sure that when they come into church, they are experiencing the full-on apex where, never water it down for children. Honestly, as I say, it's a primary school teacher of many, many years, again, used to when people would water it down. Never water it down, give them the full-on stuff, but related to their experience. And what we're about to do is hopefully something that will convince you that's very easy to do, and obviously somebody who's got experience. As I say, please stop me, please chip in, please interrupt me, if only to give me a chance to breathe. But one phrase I want to really get across here, and it's not on this handout, I probably should put it on there. Static features. It's a phrase that Ofsted used in their recent review of the problems of religious education at the moment in this country. Too much education about religion goes into static features. They just tell you, I was chatting to one of our RE teachers who's a Muslim about this just yesterday morning. They get kids drawing 5 pillars of Islam. So what? They get kids doing a plan of a church. So what? That is static. What Ofsted are saying is if you could stick it in a glossary, that's not RE. What we're looking at here is not putting across our churches as a bit of heritage, a bit of history. What we're doing is we're showing that this heritage and history has lasted hundreds of years because it's still alive, and it'll be there tomorrow morning. And it's there, it's there obviously in the communities around us day by day, but tomorrow morning it'll come alive again and it'll refresh itself again. So we've constantly got to be reminding folks that it's about living faith. And Ofsted, as I say, I'm probably going to be more positive about Ofsted over the course of this hour than I've been for the past year. But Ofsted are pushing schools to be like that, to reject the static feature and go for a bit of life. They want a bit of pizzazz. They want the lived religious experience. They want, I get asked more often now than when I started doing this job, and I've been doing it since 2012, I get more requests to go into schools that are not church schools, because they want somebody with a little white collar sitting there, answering questions and stuff like that. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm not going to say too much about the place thing, about the theology of place, other than just to say I'll put a few bullet points there, just to get us into the idea that, we do need to understand the holiness of the place we're in. And that's the place from which we step into school. They don't need to believe it. The head teacher there doesn't need to believe it. They don't need to agree with us. They themselves may or may not. But we do come from a faith where places were sanctified, where people set up altars in wildernesses, where people lay down their heads on stones and experience that God was in that place where Abraham meets with people, and that place is holy and special as a result. And we've also got an incarnate Lord who teaches us that this time, this place we're in at any one time is an expression of the whole of God being amongst us and happens throughout life. But also, we endow the place with something. You pray in a room that often, it gains something, it takes something, You talk to folks who, how many people do you know where they've got something that is actually a bit of tat, but it's the bottle top. Oh, look, my wife somewhere's got the coke ring that we used instead of an engagement ring, because we just didn't do the engagement thing. We did, it was rather a shoddy proposal on my part, and her part, I have to say. It's a coke ring, gosh, it's precious to us. The 50p wedged into a champagne cork from the very boozy night after I got my first headship from my staff. It gave me it at the end, and that is actually in a bag pinned to the wall of my office, because it's so important. We endow these things with something special, and so our churches, they reek of that. So there is a lot about place. And also, as you'll see in what we're about to say, I do think there is something as well about us understanding the way in which our churches, through their worship, express our narrative. They are built to present the narrative. There are some things we do and don't do that express that, depending on tradition. But if you, for example, just to give one example, if you are in a tradition where the gospel, when it is read, is processed into the middle of the people and read from there, it's like a physical dance, basically. It's choreography to say something happened where God didn't just stay aloof, but came into the middle of the people and started speaking from amongst us. So it's that sort of sense of place. One thing I would say, I just made that quick reference there. This is a very quick reference before I explain the 6+1 idea, which I think sounds so gimmicky whenever I say it, but I will explain it now. But when you're doing this stuff, my suggestion would be to have ready your phrasing, your way of putting across the Christian faith. Because you will be asked about it, you will have to give quick expressions of it, and I say this, I'm not going to name any of the experiences that I name, or places for any of the bad experiences that I name, but I have heard really tortured expressions of Christian faith given to children by somebody who really just wasn't prepared to give that account of the faith, bless them. It wasn't their fault, they just, but it was torture for the person put on the spot and not doing the explaining. It was also torture for the kids who went on longer than it should have. But think of that triangle and get it as straightforward and as simple as it can. Talk about the fact that blatantly go top of the triangle. I believe God created. I believe God, we're here because there is a God who put us here. Know your bit, I suppose, of that. Know what you believe about forgiveness, and we do wrong, but God forgives us. That's almost like come up with it, kind of like almost like an elevator pitch. The idea that you can say it during an elevator journey, and be ready with that, because that's the living faith behind that building. And that brings me. I'll pause in a moment and just say. That brings me to the 6+1 idea. But is all this so far what you were expecting? This is the point sometimes where people say, I realise I'm in the wrong room. This isn't Raphael work for Baptists. This is, so please, if you're in the wrong room, run out now. Now, I worked with a few churches when I was doing this stuff, and we talked about what had gone right and what had gone wrong in school visits, and I came up with something that I've used at my own church, and it seemed to work for those people. During the centenary year, we did a lot of people coming in at the church house to prepare their churches for this sort of thing. Came up with this notion of 6+1, and the idea of 6+1 is that there are 6 things in your church, often, that are shared with other churches. 6 things that we do that are there. Sometimes there's fixtures and fittings, sometimes there's actions that we do, but 6 things that are there that you share with others. Come up with 6, pick 6, find 6. I've got a little list of 6 I'm going to rattle through, and they're the ones on the slide. But then the +1 came from, bless her, a lovely, having conversations with a lovely Karen that we used to have at the cathedral, a woman called Liz Paver, whose background, she's no longer with us sadly, but her background also in primary education and entertainment. She'd been a dancer or something like that, but anyway, she was a real character who once met, never forgotten. And she was I remember walking around her church and her picking out so many of these things that were only there would you find these, they're the special things. So we came to this idea of 6 + 1, the one that you pick as your one. Okay, so, and I've just given a few on that slide there at the bottom. At the bottom, I just said, there's the common and the unique and the selective. And then if you turn over, is this all right? It's going like horse race commentary because I've got 6 to get through, basically, okay? But if you turn over, you'll see the first 2. Now, what I'm going to do at this point as well is I'm just going to say something that, we don't need to go the full hour, provided I can say to you, later, before you, just do it mentally on your way home, just think through your own map. Because one way of doing this, if we were doing a full 2-hour session, is we'd have a bit of A3 paper, we don't have marker pen, blah, blah, do that separately. But just think of your own one as we're doing this. Just keep scribbling your own one in the margin. But the shape of the building, just the very shape of our churches, the very basic layout is something that tells a story. I have put on all these slides, you'll see occasionally a little tip. So we've already had one, the one about, it's not about history, it's not heritage. Use the language. Never ever, some of this is just principle in education, which some of you will be familiar with. But never water down the language. Nothing a 5-year-old likes more than learning the word narthex. word, the narthex. The thought that you are going to go and stand in the narthex, which is that porchy bit, that liminal space between the outer world and entering into this holy place. It's quite common, some of these are common to places of worship regardless of religion, but a lot of churches there is that sense of the doorway. Think of the Baptist church where I first came to faith. There was that table where there were always a couple of people greeting you and meeting you and bringing you in, and that sense of arrival was quite exciting. I think of the cathedral over here where actually, that space that you first go into, you've got people often greeting you and guiding you through. So doorways really important as well. And then there's the cruciform layout of the building where you've got the aisle going down and then one across in the form of a cross itself. Sometimes when you ask children to count all the crosses in the church building, it's the one that they don't pick up on, but it's there in the very floor plan that it does that. And then there's also just that very thing as well, that shape. There's also that thing of going east to west as well. Often churches are, not always, often don't, so that we're facing the sunrise when we sit in and worship. Interesting enough, Sheffield Cathedral is one of the churches that backs that trend, because Sheffield Cathedral, some of you might be aware, it is the wrong way round. It was supposed to be bigger than it is, and what's there was supposed to be the first part of a project that was then going to be much bigger and was going to go out as far as the tram tracks, which is why there's a lovely window at the east end that isn't used. We don't face it in worship there, and it got sort of held up by 1914, so the First World War broke out and they stopped building then, so we're left with what we got there. They didn't do phase two. Well, they haven't yet, who knows. But it's about picking out in that shape of the building the things that speak of, and some of this will come down to how you use it, the things that speak of your worship. And so some of that will come down to what you do when you're in there. So, in some, the actual process of going up for communion, for example, involves going into a particular space. In others, in my own, we bring the table down and we all gather around. These are the sorts of things that young people want to know. But the more access you can give a school group, the better. There's nothing they like more than the sense that that is a special space up there, and the moment they're told, yeah, you can go up there. Of course you can. It's special, but of course you're just going to a special space. Particularly as it's got a much outrageous little lost ark about it, doesn't it, going all the way to the top end. So the shape of the building, the basic layout, just talking children and young people through that. And also the name as well, just check on the name, church names are wonderful. When we were doing some work once on schools coming up with symbols and things that express something about what they were about as a school. And these were church schools. And I had two instances of it just being, getting to the end of a conversation where you thought, duh, And one was the head of St Albans, then head of St Albans, which is in Wickerson, lovely church, just doing I just go to Rotherham there. And just saying, we really emphasise courage. Children have the courage to make that leap. So we were looking up for all sorts of Bible verses and things like that express this idea of courage. And it was only at the end that somebody said, wasn't St Alban quite courageous as well? This Christian martyr, and the name was hugely significant to what we were about as a school. And the other one was the head who said, we're all about togetherness in the school, work and living together. And again, the conversation had gone on for a while, and then we realised that the school was next to Holy Trinity in Cork. I said, well, that's about as together as you can get, isn't it, really? So find your name, make your name, tell the story of your name, never assume knowledge of stuff, and then also looking at the building, look at things like what it's made of as well. As I say, the church is one of the few structures sometimes, not less so in modern churches, but particularly in traditional buildings. When I walk into Christ Church in Pittsburgh, which is my church just on the hill over there, I can see the pillars, as I can in the cathedral here, that hold that thing up. I can see the foundation stone. I can actually touch the original brickwork. Now, as adults, we've grown out of maybe the interest in that, but 25 years in primary education, one of the blessings of that is you learn to think like a 7-year-old. being told you're putting your hand on a stone that has been there for over 100 years matters when you're 7 years old, it matters when you're 9 years old. Being told that pillar is so big, I can't get my arms around it. How many of you would we need to get our arms around it to get around that pillar there? That sort of thing. You can't, I hope the slides are clear enough for you to see a little bit, but I have put a couple of buildings on there. I've tried to throw in a few from around the diocese. That on the left is Woodlands Church, up in Doncaster. Absolutely beautiful building, fascinating building inside as well. One of the beautiful things about Woodlands Church, which was relatively newish as a build for a newish community, my community up there, is it's one of the few red brick churches. It just looks striking. And then on the right, that's actually Honfleur Church, which is France and made of wood. It's one of the few wooden churches. Somebody in the church that had an arson attack a few years ago. I'm so glad I'm not in that one. I don't think I'd have liked that one, but yeah. But use the language as well. Just get the language, narthex and cruciform, words like that. I've given you a thing at the end that has a lot of good language in it.
We had local primary school, once it's like 100 metres away, but we're not church, it's not church school because it's separate from student school. And then they came in and it was for like the Easter as well, just for Easter. And one of the children said, why Jesus, because we've got a huge gold cross, crucifix, and he's on there. What's he got in his hands and feet? And so the vicar said it's nailed. He's nailed to the cross. And then the feedback we got afterwards from the teachers was we shouldn't have told them because that was upsetting. And our vicar actually, he left. I think that's one of the reasons he ended up. Yeah, he left in the end because he wouldn't actually let the schools back in after that because he got so upset because basically he couldn't tell. He said the Easter story is gruesome. He died. He got nailed to the cross. That's as simple as that's why that's what in every church if you see him absolutely. And then also from the same schools that I was the one who went the outside of the building, and our church is actually very much like this one on the front here, where it's very similar design, and you've got the graveyard, and so every direction you come from, there are like 3 directions. You go to the graveyard, and I was told I shouldn't talk to them. That's the old dead bodies in the ground. Because I said, well, I said, well, that was a Commonwealth and that one. So you sort of like, and you're thinking, well, what are we meant to? Yeah, we were a bit baffled afterwards because thinking, I don't know what. I think they just wanted, I thinking what they think the Easter story was and what they think that all these stones were in the graveyard. So, and I've got children, and my children went to that school, both of them. So I sort of like,
I mean, you will never be able to account for the degree to which people can complain about things like that. I mean, but I think without going too much down a rabbit hole, you've got people like Bruno Bettelheim, Uses of Enchantment, the wonderful book about how children need fairy stories, and not that it's a fairy story, need the original fairy stories, because actually watering down actually protects them from some of the realities of the world. I think there is something in a God who suffered that children need to be introduced to gently, and it is the story. So what I can't account for is every complaint you could get, and if you do this stuff and keep on getting people in, I mean, good grief, I get complaints on a regular basis, if it's almost like weekly, it feels like I work for one thing or the other. But that's down to sensitivity and sometimes a bit of oversensitivity. What I would say is this, it's Huw.Thomas at sheffield.anglican.org, and it's HUW. If you get one of those, quite often people will just email in. So I quite often, if there is a bit of that. We had one not that long ago. I don't think the vicar should have done it, if I'm being honest. The vicar sprinkled, as in, sprinkled and said a sort of blessing over without consent from some children, some from Muslim, and it caused quite a bit of offence to families. They were unhappy with it. It was not done maliciously, and bless him, the vicar concerned he was the one contacting me straight away. This has happened. What do I do? And often you can often peddle it back with things like that. But yeah, those sorts of things they're going to happen. They're going to happen. I wouldn't let a complaint put us off to be honest, if I let a complaint put me off what I do, I wouldn't do anything most days. I think you've got to still carry on with a little bit of engineering, but some you'll account for, some you won't. It's. But as far as which actually does bring me on to the whole thing, just try and make it fun as well, I would say, and hence put in a couple of gargoyles in there. If you've got gargoyles around the church, show them off. Can't remember where those are from. The ones on the slide there. But there are some cracking ones around that you can use. Is it all right to move on to the next one, which was the font? And it might seem like a very specific thing to narrow down to. There's some wonderful symbolism about it. In many churches, the fact that the font is at the entrance, so that it's marking the entrance into the church. And the ones that you've got there, actually, I don't know where the one on the right is from. I'm trying to remember. I should know. I think it might be. That might actually be from Christchurch, from my own place. But the one on the left is from Bethlehem, from the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. And it's really old. But you see, they both have one thing in common, which is the 8 sides. Because it's new creation. So you've got the 7 days of creation, plus one more side to mark that, that sense that we become that new creation, shaped like a chalice as well. Beautiful symbolism throughout these buildings. Like I say, that really important to bear. The building is alive. So that one on the left there has been there goodness knows how long, and I should have looked it up before I came. But a baby born now can still be baptised there. And if you bring young people into church, actually a lot of visits we do are not with church schools at Christchurch, and it's one connection either through their own baptism or the other real connection. A lot of kids have been to a baptism. It's one bit of connection with church that a lot of them will bring and talk about and remember. And then just finding within your own church those symbols and having a look at the various symbols that you've got around your walls. And again, because there are some cracking books, by the way. There's a lovely book called How to Read a Church by Richard. I've forgotten his surname. Richard, and he was a lawyer in Sheffield. I don't know if he still is, but Richard something. How to Read a Church. Anyway, there aren't many books called How to Read a Church, so if you Google that, you'll find How to Read a Church, which is a book for adults, and then probably the best book I've encountered, written for children, but as a result, a really good one for us to use when we're planning. And I checked, it is one of those ones that is not in print at the moment, I think, but there are that many second-hand eBay, Amazonable, A-booksy type out there, other supplies are available. Be a Church Detective by Clive Fewins. This is gold. I love this one because it absolutely does all the small details and just brings them to life and plays on this idea of being a detective. So as part of that, we make sure that every symbol that's got something to offer is played with. I'll just give you a moment to look at that slide there, although it's not on the screen. And you might see some of those that you've got in your own church. You might recognise some of them sometimes on the fronts of pulpits, on altars, places like that. Christchurch, we have the Alpha and the Omega in the bottom left there. They are part of our altar. Yeah. And there's a little explanatory thing at the end of your I've just copied off a lovely article by someone David J. Smith. I don't know who he is, but and I'll just mention a couple more, and then I'll say a bit about practicalities and things like that. Okay. What I would say, by the way, just I put about the symbols, that tip there, they love codes. The few minutes it takes you to get a big sheet of paper or a flip chart and explain to them. If you look to the left there, that Cairo, we won't, you can read up on what they are, you can look them up about, but that Cairo symbol, which is an ancient Greek form of the name Christ, really important because my church is Christ's church, so that symbol is quite important to me. They love that one. That is all around our building. It's when you start looking with a view to having young people in that you realise how many of them there are in the building. And one thing I like doing is asking children to look for some of those symbols, compare notes, come back into the chancel, or sit on the floor in the chancel and tell me where they've seen some of these symbols around the building. And they point this way, that way, they say they've seen this one and that one. And there's this lovely moment where I'm then able to say to them, you've all missed one. Because often they have. You've all missed one. And they look at me and say, which one? And I said, it's not that far from here. In fact, you can all see it from where you're sitting. And so they start to do this and that one over there. We said that one. No. And I said, stand up. Because actually it's built into the mosaic of the floor. Stand up, we look down. For a 7-year-old, for a 9-year-old, coded stuff, decoded stuff, it holds a certain something that is, I mean, I use it as enough of a beginner teaching maths, so I know it's going to work in this sort of thing. But look out for things like where the 10 Commandments are in your church. Look out for things like your war memorial as well. Look for your war memorial. Look for the number of names on there as well. Count how many names are on there. And I know it didn't work like this because there were big and small battles, but we did an exercise once where we worked out that on our war memorial, it meant that within Pitsmore, there were, I think we worked out, I probably got this wrong, but it was something like there would be 2 telegrams being received in the parish a week during the Great War, which again is the sort of fact, the sort of extra little bit of something that they want. Though you might get a bit of a complaint about that.
Well, I was about to say, because we've got one inside and one outside. So
oh, there we go. Yeah. Graveyard, to be honest, again, with the graveyard, I don't, I mean, they whoever they are, I don't know the school, but that's all right, but I don't need to know the school. But I would want to have a word about the graveyard. I think children being shielded from the fact of death, and I say this as well, as being the church where we used to advertise our Halloween party as being the only one where you get to do trick or treat in a real life graveyard, whoopee and the
Well, one of our graves actually says teacher of the village, and so the school is actually, the infant school is the village name, and so that's one of our features, teacher of, and so maybe it was that they didn't like, but thought that the teacher was, I don't, but it's like saying, but we have got something interesting and they're well known. So at that time, one of the pubs was named after one of these people in the graveyard. So it was like, but anyway, it's like saying, can't please everyone, but.
And just carrying on with the possible list of, from which your 6 would come, the altar, communion, just taking children up to that, explaining to them that we do it. Now, I have had people raise this one as an issue and say, children, talking to children about communion. In fact, we do teach in our schools, we do offer teaching Eucharist, we do in our primary schools to actually do communion in the school. Sometimes get the response, but, what if they don't understand? To which you just want to say, I still don't understand it myself. I've never understood it completely. It's a mystery that you keep going into. You can paddle in the shallows and swim in the depths. I would say that particularly if you're a sacramentally orientated church, it's essential. But I think for most school visits, if you want to deliver, if you want to be there for the RE curriculum, you have to, at some point, talk to them. You have to show them the bits and bobs that you get out. You have to take them to the table where that is done. Whereas one child once put it to me, because they knew where we were going as we were going there, is that where you do that bread and wine thing? Okay, where we do the bread and wine thing. That's vital. And again, there is something about what it symbolises. But if you want to take it, go back to that triangle. Tomorrow morning when I do it, we will say words that will be about how all those of us who receive it, we will believe we are being changed by this thing that happened. But everybody knows about somebody being remembered by somebody else. The last thing we were told by him well, before he finished his earthly ministry, one of the last things he said was, just remember me this way. This is the way I want you to remember me. Do this. It was Rowan Williams who said, Tom Wright, Bishop Tom Wright, who said, isn't it amazing that when Jesus wanted to explain what he was about to us, he didn't leave us with a book of doctrine, he left us with a meaning. He left us with that. So this is where we remember it. And whatever you do ritually, get it out. One of the joys I have in my job is occasionally I accompany the bishops to various school visits. And one of the classic ones, the kids love it when somebody gets dressed up in their gear. We did it we did it a while ago at our secondary. This is when I was visiting about a year or two ago. I was wonderful. We dressed this kid up in the bishop's gear, and as we were doing it was Bishop Sophie at the time. She said, I forgot to ask you what's your name? And he was called Archie. How good is that? We had Archie Bishop there in front of us all, But get the stuff out. If you do use thuribles and incense, get it out. Children love that sort of symbolism. It's why a lot of our churches where those sorts of practices take place, where children, it's where a lot of them really get some of their imaginative engagement. A friend of mine who's a priest down in Deptford in London, he got into trouble. Parents were coming to him saying, Father, you've got to change the rules. The children, they're waking us up too early in the morning. This was on Sunday morning. Because he'd introduced the rule that the first two to arrive would do the offertory and bring up the bread and the wine, bring up the elements during the offertory hymn. First two to arrive, and you say, you two, and this had resulted in massive competition amongst the children to be the ones who brought it forward. And then finally on my little list I've got the Bible and worship. Let them go in the pulpit, show them the lectern, show them the lectern shaped like an eagle, showing that beautiful soaring of the gospel, the soaring of the message on wings like an eagle, and show them. This is where we rise up on wings like eagles. Show them. If you've got a massive Bible, show them. Bear in mind some of the things that we are familiar with in our churches, like the massive Bible. I've had the privilege of being there with 5-year-olds when they go, whoa, about things like that. If you've taken a bunch of 4-year-olds who've never been into a building like some of your church buildings, into the church building, it is the first time they've been in a building that looks like that on the inside, and they've walked through that small, because by comparison with the building it is small, so it is like going through a hole into this thing that opens out like that. You hear the noise, That's what the cinema manager over the way had. That's what we're looking for. Right? And then also, part of that does bring home to me this thing, you will have to decide how you make things accessible, whether you allow, for example, them to go, if you allow them to go up into the pulpit and come down again. In my experience, they tend to quite love that. Even if you don't use the pulpit. The only time we use the pulpit at Christchurch Bitsmore is if a school group come in or during interesting games of hide and seek. Those are the only times in which the pulpit ever, the puppet is used, my puppet is used in the past of the but that lovely wine glass shape as well. And depending on what it's like, the one at Rotherham Minster, for those you're familiar with, absolutely terrifying. You look at that little piece of wood at the bottom there, and you think, I'm not going to wobble when I'm stood in that thing. So those are where you'll draw your 6. Do you see this? And then think of your +1. And your +1 is the thing that only you, not only you, but not many people would have this. Okay? So, if I think of examples I know from around the diocese, I think it's Tankersley is the only place I know of where there's a Civil War cannonball embedded in the wall. I think it's Edmonton, where the really ancient mass sundial, where the sun hits the sun. In fact, that's the one on the slide there, on the +1 slide. Coming from a time before there had been, mechanical clocks would still mark the time when mass would happen. It's over at Bradfield that they've got a Saxon cross, which again is in the photo there. They've also got a beautiful Bible as well. But these need to be ancient things. So, Sheila Sparks, who worshipped at our church for 30-odd years, the pew runners, when we had pews, they were in her memory. Okay? And just the fact that If you're 7 years old, the fact that somebody worked in the church for 30 years, and this is what that matters, you remember. If you're 9, if you're 10, this is the sort of thing that matters. But think of yours. You have one. And if we had more time at this point, I'd say, if you want to have a think about it, we'll chat about it. Ours is the Holy Banner of Christchurch. The Holy Banner of Christchurch is an optical illusion. It's, and it comes from Don. She was Sparks' husband when he was vicar. He was vicar there for 35 years. He served this one. Wonderful man. And he was once looking at the east window and the crucifixion there and the ascension of Christ on this side, and he saw a rabbit looking up at the ascending Lord, and he was puzzled by the Holy Bunny, as we now call it, and he actually did a really precarious thing with a chair and an altar, and put the chair on the altar, probably sacrilegious as well, climbed on, and we all said afterwards, the thought of falling to doom crossed our mind. And he realised what it was the impression on the ground of the footprint of Jesus. But because of the shape of it, and the thing is, you'll have to visit Christchurch to see it. I can tell you. You can keep your Westminster Abbeys and whatever they, Christopher Wren stuff and all that. We've got the Holy Bunny of Christchurch. And when we have kids in, the Holy Bunny is our +1. You'll all have something that's distinct, and it might be relatively new, it might be ancient, it might be an optical illusion, it might be something that you do that nobody else does as a practice in your church. It might be, but you'll have something that's your +1. Is that okay do you get the idea of finding the different bits and bobs? And I've put a little tip there. Think of child appeal as well. So you can take every child, you can take them every bit of Sheffield Cathedral. You can take a 4-year-old or a 10-year-old, every single bit of Sheffield Cathedral, and show them its history, show them its beautiful stained glass. The dog is what they're interested in. They want to see the
spider in the corner of
yes,
the window.
Yeah, the spider and the dog. That's what they're interested in, and that's where that's where think of it through their eyes. And the reason for 6+1 is to keep it simple and to keep it short as well. The visit doesn't need to be long. I've put a little slide there that has the word reflection on it, and if we had a bit longer at this point, we'd reflect on the whole business of the commonality of it, that there's stuff in common. But basically, look, all that slide was going to be was that triangle again. Okay? Tomorrow morning, this stuff, tomorrow morning we'll read the story of the woman at the well from our Bible, and we believe that something is happening inside us as we read it, and then we receive. That's what we'll do there, But everybody shares something of what we looked at. So it's about thinking to yourself, where is that something that we all share? Where is that something we all share that makes that connection? That was the reflection bit. And two of the things to be constantly asking about it, not literally, you don't mean literally say this to an 11-year-old, but it's like what it means to me and what it means to you, what connection could you have? Always look at it through their eyes, which, that's just good education practice anyway, isn't it? But, can I say some very quick things about procedure as well? Watch in time. I'll just say a few very quick, all of which are on your, I realise that this was done for, as I say, for the centenary year, and that is a very corny top of the slide, isn't it? I'm realising that's all the be attitude. But these are, be yourself, don't try to, again, some of this is, I'm going to start twitching because I've been on school trips where the person has tried talking like a child, do you know that childy voice thing? Just be yourself. Children actually quite like adults. They don't want fake children. Just be yourself. And if you're briefing this bit, if you're briefing a little team to do this stuff, this is really important. Just be yourself. I taught for 25 years, always at primary. Unless I was messing around, this is always the tone and the manner, and I think it works. Just to be able to speak to children on the level you're at, with the level they're at. Be a guide. So one of the things that's really important with that is just draw lines around your responsibility. You are a guide to the church building. You are not responsible for behaviour and discipline. That's really important. Never take that on. Nobody should expect that of you. That is the school's responsibility. And if they try delegating it to you, I would push back on that one. It won't work. Okay. Be brief. 30 minutes, I've suggested in the past, as being, if you're planning stuff to do, give it 30 minutes and have a bit of a structure that will fill 30 minutes. And whether that's that they come in and there's 6 of you, that's one at the end, 6 of you in different places, and they go to different stations, or whether you do the classic, we'll take you around in groups and we'll do a little circuit around the church, that sort of thing. How you do that sort of thing, different ways of doing it. But 30 minutes, you're planning, the St Philip's Centre in Leicester, who do wonderful interfaith stuff, they have this wonderful practice where they take different religious practitioners to schools and people make their way around them. And the thing they do is they have one quick, so you go to somebody who is a Muslim, they will give you one quick insight into their faith as a Muslim, because what they are not there for is to get an exhaustive, theology of Islam and practice of Islam. You're there to make an encounter, and that's what this is. So quick encounters, this is what it is. Quick, something that quickly takes them up and down that triangle, takes them from where they are to why this matters, and back to how it relates to their own experience. And then be organised.
Can I just ask from that? Have you ever done it that one of the 6 things is actually the classic 95-year-old person who they just sit and ask questions and actually literally have a relationship to talk with?
No, not done that. Not done that in when people have gone around church, other than the people showing them around, not quite 95, but I have done it with, I've been into the school with people, or I've had people come into school when I was a head. That's wonderful. One of my teachers' mums used to come in regularly because she had been at St Oswald's, which was our church attached to the school for so long, and she would talk to the children about the matter, and that was a great experience. Could do. And in a way, if you got that, is that your plus one, I suppose I'd be saying?
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
Is that the plus one? Is that the thing that you have?
I mean, if you have the right person, maybe, obviously, but...
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one... When,
kids love looking at really old people. Like they
do, as I discover increasingly. I'm finding that out. And then be organised as well. Just know that it's organised so that they'll actually have a good time. I've put some practicalities down as well. And when it comes to things to do, though, activities, the main one there is just to say not too much. And you could create worksheets, you could create booklets, you could, create something like this about your church. If it was me, and maybe I'm just too much of a teacher from the 1980s, who's, become a relic, If it was me, I'd counsel it towards, and personally found huge use still in the best resource ever created in education, which is that thing called a sheet of A4 paper folded into 4 sections. Because everything you do to make the resource makes the visit about the resource. If the school want that, they can do that if they want to. If you want to put photos of these things onto a sheet of paper and produce it, great, fine, go ahead. But personally, I would just give children that sheet of A4 paper and say, that's for you to make notes on, that's for you to draw things on, that's for you, just keep it really simple. The more complicated the thing they receive is, the less their eyes and thoughts and hearts are drawn towards the stuff of the building. And what we're trying to do is get them to count something and live in worship of the building through the beauty of some of the things that inspire us when we're inside there. And then encourage questioning, ask them questions. What I would say is just really think carefully about the questions you ask. If I was receiving this, I would always try to ask a question that I'm 99% sure most, if not everybody, could answer. And a number of times on school trips, I've sat there and thought, why did you ask that? When actually nobody can answer it, Now, why do you think we need to be forgiven of our sins? I forgive you, Jimmy. You don't need to do the RE teaching, basically. Your job is to be that good guide. So yeah, I just take care with it. If there's enough in that building to mean that a folded sheet of A4 paper and a pencil will do the trick. Because they can draw the Cairo then, they can draw the pulpit, they can draw those symbols, they can... And just practicalities, a few of them when it comes to planning a visit. Remember, you're the guide. Your job is just to communicate warmth. I was remembering, at that age, we are still at the stage where children's religious experience is experiential. They haven't yet necessarily started to knock together their own views, and certainly not their own critical view of it. They will remember how you were more than they will remember anything you tell them. So if you made for a warm welcome, then they will remember that. Whereas if you tell them in a snarky way not to go up in the pulpit, they'll just remember that as well. They will remember you know that. And then as far as schools are concerned, really clarify a few things beforehand, like what spaces can be used and what they will be used for, who is going to show around and how. You don't need to worry about things like insurance. You don't need to worry even, I would say, about health and safety, because I'm assuming your churches are already okay for public use if they're not don't take a school party in there. But so much of that is down to the school. Okay, the school should if their school aren't sure, then don't have them in. The school needs to be the ones that are sure of that. One thing you do need to be sure of is toilets, and you do need to have the conversation. This is 25 years of paying school trip speaking here. You need to know where and when the toilet access is happening. Is it going to be as and when throughout the whole of the 30 minutes? I mean, if you have 30 minutes, they're probably in there for 45 minutes, even an hour if you have a little snack afterwards. Is it going to be for the whole hour, in which case basically that school trip is going to turn into toilet time for everybody, because that's what a school trip is all about ultimately. Toilet times and gift shops, the main things in any school trip. Or are you going to leave it to staff to limit access? You have to ask the staff. Just check that out with the school. And one plea that I would make as a teacher, this rather than as somebody from a church. So if I'm coming to your church with a party of school children, please, can you give me a space to gather them? Can you make sure it's a comfortable space where we can all sit down, a space where we can leave our coats, our bags and things like that? Can you give us a base? We'll be arriving needing that, and we'll need that before we go. And it's also the space we may need to go if we need to have a pep talk. And secondly, if there are any changes, let us know before. The one thing that certainly freaks me out as somebody if I'm taking a school party anywhere, is any change that wrong fits me. If I get there and discover that Slimming World are in the hall, so there'll be other people going in and out of the toilets when I thought we were the only ones with access to the toilets. You have just landed me with, something that makes me really not like your church anymore, ever again. So, any changes, get them in beforehand. You feel, I'm sure you've all done stuff with taking people out and about, the responsibility you feel, the burden you feel. You do not want to be wrong-footed. That is it. We're just this side of 25 past actually in the end. But are there any questions, any quick questions? And as I say, I'm not going anywhere. I can answer other questions afterwards if they're like big questions. Any quick questions?
I'm really excited about doing this now.
Well, gather a good team. That's the other thing I would say. Gather a good team. Get a few people to help you out, and make it, people enjoy it. I mean, I suppose in a sense what you're here today for, because I presume you, like me, believe that there is nothing better than spending your time with 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 14-year-olds. They are just the most fantastic company to have. So whoever joins that team, they are in for a treat. They're really enjoying. They're really enjoying the things. Keep a little notebook. I'm not always a bit worried about reading too many things that children say that are a bit off the wall and funny, but keep your little notebook, because you'll can't be off good. I'll just share with you, if I may, before we go, my personal favourites. This is quite fresh from the past couple of weeks that the head phoned me. I sometimes get heads phone me just because they know I'm going to like this one. Head phoned me, he was laughing as he told me this. He said, the inspector, talking to the children about RE, said, well, you've told me quite a bit about Christianity. Can you tell me the names of any other major world religions? And they knew a few, and this school, I'll tell you the report showed, they know their stuff at this school. But they know a lot, didn't get in first. The first answer to, can you name any other major world religions, was a little boy who said, cannibalism? Good inspector. Took that one, moved on. They then did fantastically. And as is always the case, we're not allowed to say what the result of they gave a great answer. Right. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, thanks. Go. You've done a full day. You've done a full day.